It is Sunday, August 14th. We are less than 2 weeks away from college football. You're watching Right on Cue College Sports. Welcome in, welcome back. That is right, you are watching Right on Cue College Sports. I am your host, Tyson Quiller. Thanks for checking us out. Really appreciate all the support. Been getting a lot of views, a lot of interactions, some comments on the videos. Very, very much appreciate it. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and give me your feedback. At RightOnQCS on Twitter and RightOnQCS@gmail.com. I've been going through that feedback. I'm getting you back messages. Hopefully you've been seeing them. Appreciate constructive feedback. I'm trying to incorporate it into the content that we produce here. And then, a few questions or things that you want me to cover, I can sort of cater to that as well. We have been moving through this series of previewing each of the conferences for the upcoming college football season. We have covered the Mountain West Conference. We've covered the American Athletic Conference, the Big 12. We've covered Pac-12 and the ACC. Today, strap up. Have a seat, get some beer, get some popcorn, because this one's going to probably be a long one. We are covering the Big Ten Conference, and then after this episode, I'm going to probably do a preview of primarily Notre Dame, BYU, but independent schools, and then like a 30,000-foot view preview of the Sun Belt Conference USA and MAC conferences. And then hopefully before week 0 games in 2 weeks, we'll be able to come out with our final preview, which is the SEC football preview. But, like I said, today we are talking Big Ten football. Get your Midwest on, folks. Now, Clemson and Oklahoma's 6-game conference win streaks were both broken last year. Well, so too was Ohio State's 5 straight conference championship streak. It seemed like it might never happen again, but Michigan knocked off the number 2 Buckeyes on November 27th in the Big House, and then followed that up with a 42-3 just straight-up beatdown of number 13 Iowa in the Big Ten championship game. Michigan became the 12th different team to make the college football playoff and in its 8-year history, and the 3rd different Big Ten team. Now, 9 Big Ten teams finished the regular season bowl eligible. 10 teams ended up playing in bowl games. Rutgers got called up with a 5-7 record to play against Wake Forest after their opponent had to back out kind of late for COVID protocols. Overall, the Big Ten had a pretty good showing, 6-4 record. Michigan did get beat pretty soundly by the eventual champion Georgia Bulldogs in the Orange Bowl, 34-11. But Ohio State won maybe the best bowl game of last year over Utah in the Rose Bowl, and Michigan State won the Peach Bowl over number 12 Pittsburgh. 4 teams in all finished the season with double-digit wins, and another 3 teams finished the season with 9 wins. Michigan, Ohio State, and Michigan State all finished in the top 10 in the country. Overall, the 2021 season was very successful for the Big Ten. So now let's kind of turn to some kind of macro-level topics here. The Big Ten reported $583 million in football revenue in 2021, which was up considerably from the previous year, obviously. Kevin Warren, the commissioner, has really recovered from that debacle of canceling and then uncanceling the 2020 season. Now, in the news that shocked college football last month, the Big Ten secured an agreement for USC and UCLA to join their conference beginning in 2024. They have not yet decided how they're going to reconfigure the divisions to accommodate these 2 new teams, but here is your new Big Ten geographical alignment. whatever. Now, as of this week, ESPN is back out of TV rights negotiations with the Big Ten. According to Outkick, Fox is going to have the big noon time frame game out of the Big Ten. CBS will broadcast the 3:30 Eastern game. NBC will broadcast the evening game. It's kind of hard to say whether this is better or worse. All of these networks do an incredible job broadcasting these games. The quality is top notch. But on the one hand, you now have three major networks promoting the conference. But on the other hand, in this cutting the cord, fewer and fewer people having cable subscriptions, your viewers are going to probably need now access to three different streaming services: Fox Sports Now, Paramount, and NBC Sports. We'll see how it turns out. College football is ever changing. Now, we want to talk about coaches. There were really no changes in the Big Ten programs in head coaches. So let's take a quick look at some of the coaches that maybe have had the longest tenures in this conference. First and foremost, Kirk Ferentz is entering his 23rd season as the head ball coach at Iowa. Since he was hired in 1998, his overall record is 176 and 108. Iowa has had 7 seasons with double-digit wins. Iowa got a share of the Big Ten title in 2002 and in 2004, and twice since 2011 the Hawkeyes have made the Big Ten championship game. Ferentz is not at any risk of being fired, but he is expected to probably retire soon. Something to keep in mind, his son is a coordinator, I believe, a quarterback's coach for Iowa. The next longest tenured coach in the Big Ten is Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern. Since he was hired in 2006, the Cats have gone 109 and 88. They have had 3 double-digit win seasons in those 15 years. Fitzgerald has never won the Big Ten as a coach, but they have made the Big Ten championship game twice in the last 4 years. Now, Northwestern did make the Big Ten championship game in that COVID-shortened 2020 season, but they were just 3-9 last year and lost their last 6 games of the 2021 season. 5 of them by 2 or more touchdowns, 4 of those games by 3 or more touchdowns. That was a pretty ugly finish to the season. Fitzgerald, unlike Ferentz, he really is on the hot seat entering this season. Now, speaking of the hot seat, let's take a look at 2 coaches that are really kind of on the hottest of hot seats in the Big Ten coming into this season, according to coacheshotseat.com, which is another reference I use to compile this information and data for you. First, Scott Frost, Nebraska. He is the number 1 coach on the hot seat rankings in the country entering the 2022 season. Now, we all remember there was a ton of fanfare when the Huskers hired their favored son, Frost, from UCF after they had just gone undefeated and won the Sugar Bowl against Auburn, to claim a share of a national title in 2018. In the 4 years since Nebraska picked up Scott Frost as head coach, they have gone 4-8, 5-7, 3-5, and then last year 3-9. It's really hard to believe that after Bo Pelini led the Huskers to a 10-4 record in 2012, 9-4 in 2013, and 9-4 in 2014, they fired him immediately following that season. It's one of those things. There are real consequences to the decisions you make in this business. And the other coach, I don't think Frost is going to lose his job personally, because I think Nebraska is going to have a bounce back year. I don't think the same thing can be said for this next coach on the hot seat. Indiana's Tom Allen. He is number 12 in the coaches' hot seat rankings. And, news from the WTF department, Indiana went from a 6-2 record and a number 12 ranking in the country in 2020. They had wins over Penn State, Michigan, Michigan State, and Wisconsin. To last year, they had a record of just 2-10. The Hoosiers didn't play Wisconsin in 2021, but the other 3 teams I just told you that they beat in 2020, Penn State, Michigan, Michigan State, they lost last year to all 3 by a combined score of 73-22. They went on to lose their last 8 games of the season. Yikes. So now how about some news from the transfer portal? Well, according to 24/7 Sports, the Nebraska Cornhuskers had the 7th best transfer ranking in the nation. Let's break it down a little bit here. 2 massive 4-star pickups on the defense in edge Ochuan Mathis from TCU and defensive back Tommy Hill from Arizona State. They did lose a quarterback, Adrian Martinez, who was their starter the last 2 seasons, to Kansas State. But, the fan base really kind of wanted to move on from him anyway. The Huskers signed Casey Thompson from Texas to replace him, and he's a very talented dual threat. 4-star safety Kane Williams transferred in from Alabama as well. I think this defense is going to be much improved. Now, the second best Big Ten team in the transfer portal was Michigan State. Mel Tucker struck gold in the portal last year. Can he do it again? Well, Sparty also picked up 2 4-star players, tight end Daniel Barker from Illinois and the edge Chris Bogle from Florida. They picked up 2 3-star running backs who really have kind of had stellar seasons in the past, in Jarek Broussard from Colorado and Jalen Berger from Wisconsin. They also bolstered their linebacking core with UNLV transfer Jacoby Windman and Mississippi State transfer Aaron Brule. A couple of other big pickups from around the Big Ten. The number 13 ranked transfer in the country, Virginia center Victor Oluwatimi, transferred into Michigan. That offensive line is going to be studly. The 14th ranked transfer in the country, Tanner Mcallister, followed his defensive coordinator from Oklahoma State to Ohio State. Ohio State's defense is going to be pretty tough. Surprising, kind of under the radar, but they will be pretty tough this year. And on the flip side of the transfer portal coin, Northwestern's dominant safety, Brandon Joseph, transferred to Notre Dame. Now, there are a lot of players to watch in the conference this year, but we'll try and narrow it down for you a little bit. And it starts right here with Mr. C.J. Stroud. He has the best odds in the nation to win the Heisman at plus 200. This dude threw for 4,435 yards and 44 touchdowns last year. In that Rose Bowl game alone, he threw for 578 yards and 6 touchdowns. Oh yeah, and he's a unanimous preseason first-team All-Big Ten selection. Now, you might want to sit down for this one, but the second leading passer in the Big Ten last year played for the Maryland Terrapins, Talia Tagovailoa. He threw for 3,860 yards last season and was just pretty tremendous in their bowl game against Virginia Tech. He is a little limited passing in the red zone, but he's mobile, so that can kind of make up for that. The next quarterback to watch is Aidan O'Connell at Purdue. He's much more of a kind of a prototypical passer. You're going to really want to hold your breath if he gets chased out of the pocket. But between the tackles, he is outstanding. 3,712 yards passing on 71.6% completion percentage last year. We did see, though, he too is a little limited passing in the red zone. Now, really, the wealth of talent in this conference is amongst the running backs. Ohio State hasn't seen a young talent at running back like Travion Henderson since probably Maurice Clarett. You could make an argument for Ezekiel Elliott. He is the returning leading rusher in the Big Ten, having gone for 1,172 yards and 15 touchdowns last season. He also had another 312 yards, 4 touchdowns receiving. Keep in mind, as a freshman. Now, Michigan's leading rusher, Hassan Haskins, has gone pro, but you have probably arguably upgraded with Blake Corum getting more of the touches. Corum had almost 1,000 yards and 11 touchdowns in 2021. This dude is just flat lightning in a bottle. And one more running back to keep your eye on. As always, Wisconsin has a stud in Braylon Allen this year. This guy went for 1,268 yards and 12 touchdowns on the ground last year. They're really going to need to kind of incorporate him more into the passing game for Mertz if they're going to, challenge for a Big Ten title this year. Now, 2 of the best receivers in the country are back in the Big Ten for 2022. The first, and maybe Biletnikoff Award frontrunner, is Ohio State's Jackson Smith-Njigba. 1,606 yards receiving last year, and in that Rose Bowl game alone, he had 347 yards, 3 touchdowns. This dude is just unstoppable. He's so smooth with his route running. He's projected to be a top 5 pick in next year's NFL draft. The next receiver we want to talk about is Michigan State's Jayden Reed. He had almost 1,000 yards receiving, 8 touchdowns last year. The connection with your quarterback for a receiver is so important, and like with Jackson Smith-Njigba, Reed's quarterback is back in a pretty good and reliable Peyton Thorne. How about on the defensive side of the ball? Iowa linebacker Jack Campbell is the preseason selection for Defensive Player of the Year by the media. This guy had 126 tackles, a sack, 2 interceptions, and a defensive touchdown last year. He's a freaking hammer. He's in on every tackle. He's just all over the field. Now this guy is the second leading returning tackler in the Big Ten. and he's just a sophomore. Nick Henrich, 99 tackles and a half of a sack. This Wisconsin defense is going to be really good. Henrich really shines as a run stopper in the box, so there's a couple of heavy hitters there. Staying with Wisconsin, edge Nick Herbig is the top returning sack getter in the Big Ten. He had 7 last year. He did not get really a ton of tackles, but was selected a first-team all-conference preseason. Back to Iowa, Riley Moss, at defensive back, had 4 interceptions, 2 defensive touchdowns last season. That Iowa pass defense was lights out and elite 1 year ago, but they have lost quite a bit in the secondary. My pick, though, for best returning secondary player is Jair Brown at Penn State. He too had 4 interceptions, 1 defensive touchdown, 67 total tackles. This guy is a menace, very secure in open field tackles. So now why don't we take a little bit of a dive into the power rankings. These are, for lack of a better term, power talent rankings, okay? This isn't comparing up schedules and seeing who would beat who or whatever. This is just flat out what are the more powerful, more talented teams by a whole series of metrics. And let's go ahead and start in the East Division here. And again, as always, you can see the power ranking in the left-hand column and their record from the previous year in the right-hand column. The number 1 team in the country, according to my power rankings this year, is the Ohio State Buckeyes. They just return so much talent on offense, and I think they actually have improved their defense with a lot of the pickups that they've made. 4th in the country, the Michigan Wolverines, very, very solid, very stable. You lost Hutchinson and Ajabo, but pretty much most of everything else returns. So you just are kind of looking at replacing the edge presence, and I mean, massive amounts of offense stayed. So then Michigan State 15, and then you'll sort of see as we go through this, Penn State from 30-ish to 50. I have like 8 teams. I mean, they're all basically interchangeable. In the East Division, Penn State and Maryland are the kind of the top and the bottom end of that bracket. Rutgers, 76. Indiana is in dire straits. And Tom Allen is likely to lose his job. But let's go ahead and let's start here with the Ohio State Buckeyes. Listen, the only offense that my metrics have better this year than the Buckeyes is Virginia. I mean, this was the number 1 offense in the country last year. And as I mentioned before, you're returning your starter at quarterback. He's probably the leading candidate for the Heisman in C.J. Stroud. Now, if I could try and nitpick here a little bit, there are 2 new starters on the O-line. One is redshirt freshman Donovan Jackson at right guard. The other sophomore Luke Whippler at center. Now, Whippler was a 4-star recruit, and Jackson was a 5-star top 20 recruit in the country. So, I mean, there's certainly no slouches, but they are new starters. But on the right side of the line, you have a pair of first-team All-Big Ten selections in DeJuan Jones at right tackle and Matthew Jones at right guard. So I don't think you can be too concerned about the O-line. Remember, though, behind this O-line is maybe the best returning running back in the conference in Travion Henderson. Now, this wideout group is absolutely loaded again. Jackson Smith and Jigba had over 1,600 yards receiving last year and will certainly be the number 1 target this year. But in comes new starter Julian Fleming, who was a 5-star recruit 3 years ago. And the dude on your screen you're looking at right now, Marvin Harrison Jr. Yes, the son of that Marvin Harrison, the all-pro, probable Hall of Famer from the Indianapolis Colts. His son, Marvin Harrison Jr., was a 4-star recruit. But the dude had 3 touchdown receptions in the Rose Bowl last season, really showed flashes of greatness. There's just a ton of talent all over the board on this offense. Now, the fewest points this Ohio State offense was held to last year was just 26 by Nebraska. I don't know if there's a single team out there that can keep them from scoring 4 touchdowns this year. Now let's talk about the defense here. This unit was top 60 in the country last year, and when you consider their offense was so explosive that the defense faced, on average, kind of 2 additional possessions per game over the average team, that's really pretty impressive. So, 82% of that production is back, and man, my numbers have this Ohio State defense as the 4th best in the Big Ten, number 18 in the country. So the questions, they surround the D-line. Both Haskell Garrett and Nicholas Petit-Frere have gone pro. That's 2 of your 3 D-linemen. But your 1 returning starter, Zach Harrison, is a first-team preseason all-conference selection. Now, it is looking like the Buckeyes have moved him to linebacker, though, under new defensive coordinator Jim Knowles. This is the coordinator who came in from Oklahoma State. So the D-line in 2022 will start 2 freshmen. This year's starting nose tackle Tyleik Williams collected 5 sacks in limited play last year, and the other freshman, JT Tuimoloau, was a 5-star recruit in 2020. Listen, I think you're going to see Notre Dame try to exploit the turnover on the defensive front in week 1, but they are still super talented. Now in the linebacking group, like I said, you have first-team All-Big Ten Zach Harrison. Steele Chambers at will linebacker will be the leader of this unit, though. He is third-team All-Big Ten selection. And your Mike linebacker is back in Tommy Eichenberg. So this linebacking group is one of the most talented and experienced in the nation. And behind them in the secondary, you have one potential liability in senior safety Josh Burke. He was a 4-star recruit and has seen, kind of limited play time. I think teams are going to try and target him in the passing game because the rest of the secondary is going to be stacked. You have returning starters Cameron Brown and Denzel Burke at corner. Although Burke is just a redshirt freshman, he was selected first-team all-conference. At free safety, you return first-team all-conference selection and candidate for Defensive Player of the Year in the conference, Ronnie Hickman, who led the team in tackles with 98 last year. And, by the way, did I mention, in comes Oklahoma State stud transfer Tanner Mcallister to play the nickel, the 14th best transfer in the country this past offseason. This team may struggle with the run a little bit as the D-line develops early, but no team in the conference has as much talent in the back 8. So, hey man, this is the year for Ryan Day and Ohio State. Their contemporaries, Clemson is down a bit. Alabama and Georgia are both replacing double-digit starters. And the Buckeyes return almost 80% across the board of their production from last year. If you step down kind of one more tier from that, Oklahoma and Notre Dame's coaches just left, and Michigan, who has become a real kind of contender now, you get them at home. Your 2 toughest opponents, like I mentioned, are both at home week 1, Notre Dame, and the big game versus Michigan is in the horseshoe as well. You're at Penn State, at Michigan State, but, this team really should go undefeated in 2022. Now, the Michigan Wolverines. They were 15th in the country in rushing offense and top 25 in the country in red zone offense 1 year ago. Those are indications of them having a chance, maybe, to win at the Horseshoe against Ohio State. And they returned 87% of that production on the offense. Now let's start here with the changes and kind of the storyline. Your Broyles Award winner, offensive coordinator Josh Gaddis, did leave to take the same position at Miami. And so Harbaugh has replaced him with kind of co-offensive coordinators promoted from within. Sharon Moore was the O-line coach and a co-coordinator last year. And the other co-coordinator, Matt Weiss, is quarterback's coach. Now, I don't think there's really any reason for pause with this change on the offense, but you still do have this quarterback discussion looming. Basically, the word around the water cooler in Ann Arbor is that Cade is proven, but the ceiling is kind of too low, and JJ is more unproven, but for a 5-star recruit, the ceiling is much higher. Now, Michigan stuck with Cade McNamara, getting kind of 90% or more of the snaps last year, and they were able to ride that all the way to the playoff. He is listed as the starter coming out of fall camp, but look for that discussion to kind of continue. They have a series of kind of weak opponents to start off the season, so you might see some sharing of duties and responsibilities at the quarterback. Elsewhere, though, in the receiving corps, you get back speedster Ronnie Bell, who was a first-team all-conference preseason in 2021, before going down early to a season-ending knee injury. He will join the top 3 leading receivers who are all back. Cornelius Johnson led the team with 627 yards, and Roman Wilson collected 25 catches for 425 yards of his own. The second leading receiver from last year was their spectacular tight end, Eric All. All had 437 yards receiving and has really been kind of outstanding blocking in the run game. This offensive line returns 4 starters, and the new addition is big Victor Oluwatimi, who goes 6'3", 307, and was the number 13 transfer in the country from Virginia. O-lineman Ryan Hayes is a first team, and Zach Zinter is second team all Big Ten. Listen, this offense is going to do whatever it wants. Oh, yes, and behind that great O-line will be Blake Corum. Like I said, this is certainly a top 15 offense in the country. Now, on defense, like I said, you lost Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo off the D-line, who were both drafted in the NFL. Hutchinson, second overall, and Ojabo, number 45 to the Baltimore Ravens. But your nose tackle, Maisie Smith, returns and is a first-team all-conference selection. Joining him up front will be two big underclassmen in Mike Morris and Chris Jenkins. They both played in 8 or more games last year, so the cupboard is not completely bare, but you're trying to replace a combined 25 sacks last year in Ojabo and Hutchinson. Man, that's a lot to replace. Your two leading tacklers last year, Josh Ross at linebacker, plays for the Ravens now, as well as safety Dax Hill, who plays for the Bengals. But starters Nakai Hill-Green and Junior Colston are back in the linebacking group. They combined for 110 tackles and 3 forced fumbles in 2021. They are really going to need to step up and run defense behind this kind of rebuilt D-line, especially in those early games. Michigan averaged 2.5 sacks per game last year. I would look for that to drop off a bit, but they're still going to have a very outstanding front. In the secondary, 3 starters are back, and you really have 4 guys who played meaningful minutes in 2021. Turner, Moore, Moten, and Green. But there really isn't any wow factor amongst this group. These 4 collected just 2 interceptions and averaged 30 tackles on the season last year. First-time starter Mike Sandstrill at nickel is completely unproven. Pass defense is probably going to be a little bit of a liability. They will struggle at times as well. You might say, well, why is their defense ranked number 13? Well, there is a lot of change and unproven talent, but Michigan has recruited extremely well on the defensive side of the ball in the last 3 years. Something to keep in mind, Michigan's punter, Brad Robbins, and kicker, Jake Moody, are both preseason first-team all-conference. That's another kind of under-the-radar dynamic that could flip the script in a close game. This schedule, like last year, is very much backloaded. The Wolverines, I think, are going to cruise to a 4-0 record pretty easily. And a lot of folks have been talking about, well, you got that game at Iowa. And it is true that it has been tough for Michigan at times to win at Iowa. But that's not the kind of team that will beat Michigan in 2022. Michigan's liability is on defense, and especially in the secondary on defense. And Iowa's offense is going to be terrible. I think they win that by 2 scores. Penn State, Michigan State, both at home. Penn State has a ton of hype this year, but I'm not so sure that I buy it. Clifford won't really threaten this defense. You may see some challenge from Michigan State with the connection from Thorne to Reed, but Michigan, I think, is going to avenge that loss from last year. Michigan and Ohio State, I think, are both going to be 11-0 going into the final game of the season. But that number 2 offense in the country and no real backfield sack threats to speed them up as Michigan lost Ojabo and Hutchinson. If the Wolverines can run the ball heavy and shorten the clock, they may keep it close, but I think the Buckeyes are going to run away with that game in a high-scoring affair. Now Michigan State. Maybe the best thing this unit has going for them is that their redshirt junior starting quarterback Peyton Thorne is back. Now, he won't blow you away, but he did come up big in some key moments last year, threw for 4 touchdowns and 0 interceptions against Miami early in the season, and 3 touchdowns to just 1 interception against Pittsburgh in their bowl game. But he did throw 29 touchdowns to 10 interceptions in 2021. And against Michigan and Ohio State, he threw just 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions. Now, his top weapon in the passing game is back, Jayden Reed. On just 59 catches, he came up with over 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns. He averaged 17.8 yards per catch. He's one of those guys, if Thorne can just get him the ball in the open field, watch him work, he's going to do some magic. Sparty does return just 65% on this side of the ball, so Mel Tucker went back to the transfer portal to try and fill some holes. The reigning Doak Walker Award winner, Kenneth Walker, the third, the Wake Forest transfer in 2021, has gone pro. So Tucker signed Jarek Broussard from Colorado, who is the leader in the clubhouse on the depth chart, and Jalen Berger from Wisconsin. 3 starting O-linemen are back up front. Left guard J.D. Duplain is a first-team all-conference selection. And Sparty brought in grad transfer Brian Green from Washington State to fill a hole at right guard. Ohio State, Michigan State were all top 30 in the country in the fewest sacks given up last season. These are 3 strong groups up front. As long as Thorne can, kind of hold the ball and the running backs can get going, this offense can definitely be serviceable. Now, whoa, Nelly. This pass defense was absolutely last in the country in 2021, giving up 324 yards per game through the air. That's going to be a problem playing against teams like Ohio State and Maryland, maybe even Michigan, who all 3 returned their starting quarterbacks. In the case of Maryland and Ohio State, they were both top 13 in the country in pass offense. Back to Michigan State, 4 of your starters in the secondary are back in Kimbrough, Henderson, Gose, and Williams. They are all upperclassmen, but man, were they bad last year or what? I mean, in comes grad transfer Amir Speed from Georgia. They're hoping, another year of development, Amir Speed coming in. Maybe you can lock up that defensive secondary a little bit better. He did play in 7 games last year for the Dogs, but, really never had more than 2 tackles in a game, and he was just a 3-star recruit coming out of high school. So, I'm not super impressed with what they've done with this group. Up front, though, senior D-tackle Jacob Slade is a first-team All-Big Ten selection. To his outside, defensive end is Florida transfer Chris Bogle, who I already talked about, who Tucker has really been gushing over in the offseason. You do have sophomore D-tackle in Simeon Barrow, but he had a lot of playtime last year and 3 sacks. This is a solid group, and they seem to be really coming along strong. Now, this linebacking group is much improved as well. At will linebacker is second-team All-Conference Cal Halliday, who had 89 tackles, 2 interceptions, and a forced fumble last season. At Mike linebacker, UNLV transfer Jacoby Windman, who had 118 tackles and 6.5 sacks a year ago. This pickup, I think, really kind of flew under the radar, but I think it was a really good get from Mel Tucker. Now, I think my numbers have this defense ranked maybe a little bit too high because of how suspect the secondary is, but we'll see how they come together. Michigan State is certainly the 3rd most talented team in the conference, but the schedule is pretty tough for Sparty. After 2 early wins, Washington, I think, will be better than people think. You should beat Minnesota at home, and then look at this. At Maryland, Ohio State, Wisconsin, and then at Michigan. I mean, they could lose every one of those. I think they probably won't, but, then you get 3 wins, and you finish at Penn State. I mean, wow, that is a tough schedule. I see at least 3 losses, maybe more like 4. Michigan State probably goes 8-4. On to Penn State. Boy, James Franklin has really hit a brick wall of reality after being kind of the hot new thing a couple years ago. In the last 2 years, Penn State is just 11-11. This offense was 90th, I will repeat, 90th in the country in scoring and 82nd in total yards last year. Now, 3-year starter Sean Clifford is back at the helm. In 2019, in his first year starting, he looked like he had great potential. He threw for 2,700 yards, 23 touchdowns, to just 7 interceptions. But the last 2 seasons, he has really plateaued, throwing 17 interceptions and having a lower passer rating in each of those years than 2019. Now, some might argue that's because of weapons he's lost. Well, never mind the fact that he had Jahan Dotson. But in comes Western Kentucky transfer Mitchell Tinsley, who was the number 2 target in the most potent passing attack in the country last year for the Hilltoppers. Tinsley gathered 1,400 receiving yards and 14 touchdowns. The second and third leading receivers for the Nittany Lions are both back in Lambert Smith and Washington, which provides kind of a comfortable safety blanket for Clifford. In the backfield, Penn State's leading rusher is back in Kevon Lee. But this was really a running back by committee last season, and your other back, Noah Kane, transferred to LSU. You have a sophomore starting at left tackle and a freshman starting at left guard. This rushing offense was 118th in the country a year ago. I mean, can they get the ground game going at all? That will remain to be seen. On the defensive side of the ball, 3 senior starters return up front, headlined by first-team All-Big Ten nose tackle P.J. Mustafer. Now, Mustafer only played in 6 games last year before suffering a season-ending injury against Iowa, as he was kind of locking horns with the Iowa center and first-round NFL draft pick this past offseason, Tyler Linderbaum. The former 4-star recruit out of Maryland is a mountain of a man, this being Mustafer at 6'4", 321. He has had 56 tackles and 2 sacks in the past 2 seasons, playing just 6 games in each. If he could stay healthy, he'll be a real game wrecker. In the linebacking group, your top 2 tacklers from last season, Ellis Brooks and Brandon Smith, have both gone pro. Junior Mike linebacker Curtis Jacobs will be Penn State's most experienced returning linebacker. He had 61 tackles and 3 sacks a year ago. Your other 2 linebackers, Elsdon and Sutherland, had limited play time last year and combined for just 34 tackles in 2021. Now, Elsdon is a sophomore and was just a 3-star recruit, and Sutherland is now a senior, former 4-star recruit, but a bit undersized as a converted safety. Yeah, I have some real kind of questions with this, traditionally hallowed and storied Penn State linebacking group. In the defensive secondary, I already mentioned safety Jair Brown is the straw that stirs the drink. He is a first-team All-Big Ten selection, had 73 tackles and 6 interceptions last year. That was best in the Big Ten. Your other stud safety, Jaquan Brisker, has gone pro. So in steps Keaton Ellis. Now this is truly a homegrown kid, a 4-star recruit out of State College, Pennsylvania. We have heard a lot of good things about this kid out of fall camp, so we will see how his development has come along. Keep in mind, though, the Lions will be featuring a freshman in the secondary and a sophomore at linebacker and on the D-line. Now, my numbers have 4 teams in the West with a higher talent ranking, and Nebraska is just 1 spot behind Penn State. This is not the Nittany Lions of old. Listen, right out of the gate, I could see these guys lose at Purdue. Don't sleep on Purdue this year. They have a legit chance to win the West. Penn State will then, though, win their next 4 before they travel to Michigan. They could beat Minnesota at home and win 3 of their last 4, but 8-4 looks kind of like the ceiling in year 9 for James Franklin, and they could easily drop to 6-6. Next, the Maryland Terrapins. And under Mike Locksley, these guys certainly know where their bread is buttered. You have probably the second best quarterback in the conference in Talia Tagovailoa, who threw for 3,860 yards in 2021, second most in the Big Ten behind just C.J. Stroud, who again is the Heisman frontrunner. In the backfield with Tagovailoa is sophomore running back Colby Mcdonald. He had 325 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground last year as a backup. This is definitely a downgrade, so he'll have to really come along. This offensive line will be improved, though, starting 4 upperclassmen and headed up by second-team all-conference left tackle Jalen Duncan. Your QB's top target, Rakim Jarrett, is back after collecting 62 catches for 829 yards 1 year ago. Dante Demas is certainly no slouch either. The offense returns 83% of their production from last season. That's number 18 in the country. But, there's a real boom or bust factor to this offensive unit. The ceiling is really quite high. The floor, though, can get low. Tagovailoa was sacked 25 times last year and threw 11 interceptions, some of those in really pretty critical moments. So on the defense, let's start with the bad. This unit was 98th in the country, giving up almost 31 points per game in 2021. Only one of your top 5 leading tacklers from last year is back. And Brian Williams, your new defensive coordinator, is the 4th defensive coordinator at Maryland since 2019. I mean, maybe he can get it turned around, but that certainly seems like a problem. Now, to the potential. This unit was top 50 in the country in red zone efficiency. That shows some real fight at the goal line, even though you may not have the skill to compete between the 20s. The top returning tackler, Reuben Hippolyte, had 62 tackles in 2021. And in comes West Virginia transfer Vandarius Cowan, who was a 4-star recruit at Alabama in 2020. He hasn't really played much, but, if Nick Saban saw something in him, I've got to think that there's some talent there. In the secondary at defensive back, you return Jakorian Bennett, who is really a pretty good man-to-man defender. He came up with 3 interceptions last year. This defensive side of the ball is going to struggle at times, especially with such a high-flying boom or bust offense. You get 2 easy wins out of the gate. And I know Maryland fans are looking at that September 24th game at Michigan. Just look past that. That's a loss. But the game a week before that against SMU, that one's going to be a fun one. 2 kind of evenly matched teams, very similar styles. And that one could easily be like 50-45 when all the dust settles. The Terps could maybe beat Purdue at home, then 2 wins, and you lose probably 3 of your last 4. Man, the Big Ten is tough. I think this looks like 6-6, but this team could certainly get bowl eligible. Now, it's very trendy to say that Greg Schiano has this team headed back in the right direction after like a decade of misery, and that's partially true. After going 1-11 in Chris Ash's final season, the Knights finished the regular season last year 5-7, but 3 of those wins were over Temple, the worst team in the American, Syracuse, maybe the worst team in the ACC, and Delaware. They did represent themselves pretty well in that bowl game, though, that they were heavily overmatched in and kind of got the nod late and had limited prep time for. In 2022, this offense was really active in the transfer portal. They picked up 5 new starters, 2 at wideout and 3 on the offensive line. Wide receiver Sean Ryan comes in from West Virginia, where he was really kind of a serviceable piece, 400 yards receiving, 3 touchdowns. And wide receiver Taj Harris comes in from Syracuse, but he's kind of completely unproven. Syracuse just never passes the ball, so you don't really know what you've got in him. So, a completely rebuilt O-line, and you didn't really upgrade at the position you needed to in quarterback. So, Noah Verdral is your starter again. He threw for just 1,800 yards and 7 touchdowns to 7 interceptions last year. I mean, that's just basically irrelevant. They lose probably their best weapon, Isaiah Pacheco, at running back to the NFL. Brace yourself, Rutgers fans. This offense is going to be bad this year. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, this group was top 50 in the country in first down defense, which is huge because, it sets the opposing offense behind schedule, shrinks the playbook for them as well. But they were 82nd in total defense, and they returned just 61% of their defensive production from a year ago. Christian Azian is the Knights' leading returning tackler in the secondary, and they brought in Central Connecticut transfer Rainey Abdulaziz to help bolster the back end. But they're projected to start 4 sophomores, 2 on the D-line. This is the better side of the ball, though. So, listen, if they're going to contend for a bowl game again like they did last year, you need to beat Boston College week 1 on the road. They'll get the next 2 wins and probably beat Indiana at home on October 22nd. But what other game do they really have a chance in? I mean, this may be the toughest conference schedule of any team in the Big Ten. My money is on 3-9. Maybe they could go 4-8. And now, Indiana. I must admit, I got burned by Indiana last year. I picked them preseason top 25 going into 2021, and they finished the season 2-10. So I may be underestimating them a bit, but we continue to see that the vast majority of the big storylines from 2020 were just kind of like a mirage in the desert and disappeared the very next year. Your 2-time starting quarterback, Michael Penix, the guy who led them on that miracle 2020 run, has transferred to Washington. But, that's not the worst thing in the world. He really struggled with injuries, and when he wasn't hurt in 2021, he had regressed tremendously. The Hoosiers really needed to upgrade at this position, and they really didn't get anything done. So in steps senior Jack Tuttle, who played in 5 games last year, but only once threw for more than 6 completions in a game. Now, at running back, senior Sean Shivers transferred in from Auburn. He had 14 carries for just 87 yards and a touchdown all of last season. In his 4-year career so far, he has less than 1,000 yards rushing and just 8 touchdowns. I fail to see how he's going to move the needle. But you do have an experienced O-line and a couple of nice pieces in Swinton and Matthews at wideout, but this offense is just going to be really, really bad. Now, the Hoosiers were tied for 3rd to last in the country in turnover margin in 2021, and that just crushed this defense. Not only could they not force fumbles and interceptions, but their offense just kept giving up the ball, forcing them into like short field stands on defense. Indiana gave up an average of 33.25 points per game, but they get 90% of their production back on the defense in 2022. You know, the strength is in the secondary with second-team all-conference D-back Tawan Mullen and a tremendous future pro, in my opinion, in safety Devin Matthews. All 11 expected starters are seniors. So, you know, I expect this unit to improve, but they really need the offense to be more disciplined and turn the ball over less. So this is, I think, probably a make-or-break year for Tom Allen, and I think he may be out of a job here pretty soon. Let's look at the games that they have. Let's look at the games that they have a chance in, assuming that they don't turn the ball over as much as they did last year. Illinois at home is kind of a complete toss-up. Illinois is currently favored on the road by 5 points by CBS Sportsbet. Indiana can win that. They could win the next two at home, but I don't see them winning a single conference game after that. You know, this is probably another 2-10 season in Bloomington. There's just no talent all over the boards here. Now let's move on to the West Division. And you can see my front runner, most talented team in the West Division is Wisconsin. But then again, like I said, Minnesota, Purdue, Iowa, and Nebraska, all between 30 and 40. These are all, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and Nebraska are all very, very, very similar teams. Extremely solid, stout defense, and really kind of suspect offense. Purdue is kind of the opposite. Not a great defense, but real high upside on the offense. So it's going to be interesting to see how that boils out. At the bottom here, Northwestern really does not have a ton of returning talent, and Illinois doesn't either. Those are kind of interchangeable to me, but certainly the two least talented teams in this division. Now, let's talk about Wisconsin. It is certainly arguable that this was the best team in the West last year. They beat the eventual West Division champion Iowa 27-7 as a part of a 7-game winning streak down the stretch after starting just 1-3. But, you know, that's why they play the game. They had an inexplicable loss to Minnesota on the last weekend of the season, and that left them on the outside looking in. You know, we've been waiting for this Badger offense to take the next step for 2 years now, after they had kind of chased their starting quarterback Jack Cohn out the door for 4-star recruit Graham Mertz. Mertz didn't even surpass 2,000 yards last year, and he had 10 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. There is a lot of upside supposedly with this kid, but that remains to be seen. In the backfield with him, though, Braylon Allen had the third highest yards per carry average in the country last year at 7.1. That is certainly impressive on his part, but also a reflection of the incredible discipline and power of this two tight end set offensive line in front of him. 5 of those 7 guys are back, but the 2 that aren't are being replaced by sophomores, 1 at left tackle and 1 at right guard. Joe Tippmann at center is a second-team All-Big Ten, and left guard Tyler Beach is a third-team selection as well. Big uglies up front. In the wide receiving group, Chimere DK is the top target for Mertz in the passing game. But outside of DK, you know, your other target is freshman Skylar Bell, a former 3-star recruit. They're really going to need him to come along and progress, and they're going to need reliable first down catches from the tight ends to win this division this year. Now, I do think the offense will be better, steady, heavy run game, and control the clock and possessions. But this offense was 88th in the country last season, and the Badgers still went 9-4 with a Las Vegas Bowl win over Arizona State because of this defense. This was the number 1 defense in the country last year in yards allowed at just 239 per game. That was 30 yards better than the number 2 defense in the country, the Georgia Bulldogs. They gave up more than 15 points in just 4 of their 13 games last season. Now, only 59% of that production is back, and there are a few big shoes to fill. First and foremost is their first-team all-conference linebacker, Leo Chanel, who led the team in tackles, and your second leading tackler from last year, Jack Sanborn. They both went pro. This means the dude I previewed earlier, Nick Herbig, is going to need to be, he's going to be expected to lead the defense in this linebacking group this season. Herbig is a first-team All-Big Ten preseason selection. He had 61 tackles and 9 sacks and a forced fumble a year ago. I think he's ready, to take the helm, to take the leadership of this defense. In the secondary, UCLA transfer Jay Shaw at defensive back comes in to help bolster a very strong returning squad. Your safety, John Torchio, started all 13 games last year and collected 3 interceptions. There are 2 new starters, but they have all shown to be very solid open field tacklers. I think this defense is going to be outstanding again this year. Now, this Badgers defense gave up just 64 yards per game on the ground last year, which was also number 1 in the country. That begins with a monstrous and active defensive line in the 3-4 box. At D-tackle, Matt Henningsen also went pro, but your 2022 nose tackle, Keanu Benton, was first-team all-conference selection. And on one D-end, Isaiah Mullins returns as a starter. The other D-end, Rodis Johnson, is a very serviceable replacement, I think, for Henningsen. Now, some might think I'm crazy for having Wisconsin as the top defense again with all of this turnover, but the way this offense plays, they really kind of limit defensive possessions. And you have maybe the best defensive coordinator in the country, who's still running things in Madison, in Jim Leonard. This Badgers defense has been top 10 in each of the last 3 seasons. That is a system that sets them up for success. You've heard the term before, this unit reloads rather than replaces. Well, that's the case for this bunch. Really, the stability of this program is very much due to Barry Alvarez's kind of invisible hand, but Paul Chryst has done very well for himself as head coach of the Badgers. The schedule shapes up pretty nicely for Wisconsin this year. 3 easy wins out of the gate. They'll lose at Ohio State, but Illinois at Northwestern, those are easy wins as well. The last 6 games, it really isn't out of the realm of possibility that they win. I think the floor for the program this year is 8-4, but they could go as high as 10-2. On to Minnesota. Well, Tanner Morgan is back at the helm. Yes, this is going to be his 5th season starting at quarterback for the Gophers. It seems like it's been a decade. The last 2 seasons, he really had kind of regressed. But in 2022, he gets his offensive coordinator, Kirk Soraka, back from the unbelievable season he had in 2019, where he threw for 3,253 yards and 30 touchdowns. He had something like the 4th best passer rating in Big Ten history that year. So, reunited and it feels so good? Well, I'm not as certain as some. They did have 2 pros in the receiving corps in Rashad Bateman and Tyler Johnson that season. They both had gone for over 1,200 yards, 11 touchdowns in 2019. The third leading receiver, though, from that 2019, Chris Ottman-Bell, is back for his senior season this year. Now, thinking of what we just discussed, Ottman-Bell hasn't had a single season where he's caught more than 510 yards and 6 touchdowns. I think this offense is really kind of hoping for a shot in the arm from Soraka's return, but I'm not so sure that the talent on the edge is there. Elsewhere, the running game for the Gophers really should be spectacular. You return 2 senior starters on the O-line on the interior, one of which, center John Michael Schmitz, was first-team All-Big Ten selection, and you bring in 2 massive transfers. At right guard, 6'6", 330, Chuck Filiaga comes in from Michigan, and right tackle Quinn Carroll goes 6'6", 310 in from Notre Dame. The Gophers also have a tight end who's receiving a lot of props around the Big Ten in Brevin Spanford, who can be a real first down getter in the passing game, but is, like Michigan's Eric All, really known for his blocking ability. Now, behind these big uglies is Mohamed Ibrahim, who was a first-team preseason all-conference last year before suffering just a truly tragic season-ending leg injury in their opening game versus Ohio State. Ibrahim has twice rushed for over 1,000 yards in a season. Even without him last season, Minnesota was still a top 30 in the country rushing the ball. If he is fully recovered, this could really kind of be an under-the-radar Doak Walker candidate. Now, Minnesota had a phenomenal season last year on defense as well. They were 3rd in the country in total defense, and after week 2, they held their opponent's offense to 2 or fewer touchdowns in 9 games. But Less production returns for this bunch than does the Badgers defense. D-tackle Thomas Rush had 5.5 sacks in 2021, and returning nose tackle Carter Trill had a sack as well. But you have two brand new starters in freshman Devin Eastern and sophomore Jalen Logan Redding at defensive end. That really kind of has me concerned that this defensive front isn't going to be able to get pressure. The team's leading tackler last year, Jack Gibbons, now plays for the Titans, but their second leading tackler, Mariano Sori-Marin, returns to lead this unit at linebacker. He had 85 tackles, 2 forced fumbles, and an interception a year ago. All upperclassmen in this linebacking group. This position group, I think, should be pretty solid again. And in the secondary, you have several returning solid pieces, headed up by safety Tyler Nubin, who had 49 tackles, 3 interceptions a year ago. But elsewhere, you have a real lockdown corner in Justin Wally, and joining Nubin deep is another ball hawk, free safety Jordan Howden, who came up with 43 tackles in the open field last year. I think this is a great secondary group as well, and the defense as a whole, I think, is certainly still top 25 in the country. Now, this is, like I said, kind of where things really get tricky in this conference. My numbers have Michigan and Ohio State as a clear cut above, Michigan State and Wisconsin as kind of the next tier. But then we have the next 6 teams are all power rankings between number 30 and 50 in the country. That means home field advantage is going to be huge amongst this grouping. Minnesota is, I think, the most talented of that group. This schedule also shapes up pretty nicely for Minnesota. There are a pretty clear 7 wins, I think, on the schedule here, including a win over my Colorado Buffaloes. At Penn State, at Nebraska, and Iowa at home, I think will determine whether this group finishes 10-2 or 7-5. Next, we have the Purdue Boilermakers. Unquestionably the best offense in the West Division, and the 4th best, I think, in the conference, resides in West Lafayette, Indiana. Purdue had the 5th best passing attack in the nation last year. So let's start right here. Aidan O'Connell is back at quarterback. He is a straight gunslinger. He had the 3rd most passing yards in the conference last year, and surprisingly, the 2nd best QBR as well. In their Music City Bowl win over Tennessee, which in my opinion I think was one of the funnest games of the year last year, O'Connell had 534 yards and 5 touchdowns passing. That is just unbelievable. But your top 3 receivers from last year are all gone: Bell, Wright, and Anthrop. Charlie Jones transfers in from Iowa, where he had 323 yards, 3 touchdowns last year. And he is joined by Brock Thompson and TJ Sheffield, who had good minutes last year. They're experienced, a little bit seasoned. 789 yards, 9 touchdowns between the two of them. Tight end Payne Durham is a second-team All-Big Ten selection as well. I think this team is really going to try and be wide open in the pro-style passing game. So as long as the O-line can hold, they're going to be putting up big numbers. Now, the Boilermakers were 127th in the country in rush offense last year. And I mean, that's probably more of a reflection of the style of play that Jeff Brom calls, because they do have a talented running back who returns in 2022 in King Doru. They really should work to establish the running game more this season, as they only had 7 rushing touchdowns last year. They had just 27 red zone touchdowns on 49 visits. That's not terrible, but you can improve that by leaning into the run. Defensively, Purdue returned 72% of their 2021 production, and surprisingly, they were a top 50 total defensive unit in the country. The reason I say surprisingly is because, this offense is just so dynamic. All 3 defensive linemen are back. D-tackle Branson Dean is a second-team all-conference selection. He had 3 sacks and a forced fumble last year. This linebacking group is going to have some heavy hitters, I think. Kydrian Jenkins, who had 5 sacks, has been moved to DN from linebacker. Second-team all-conference safety Jalen Graham has moved to the linebacker group as well. In the secondary, safety Cam Allen, 65 tackles, 4 interceptions in 2021. And you have a very talented defensive back in Corey Trice, who moves into the starting lineup. But the depth in the secondary, I think, will be a bit of a liability for this Purdue defense. Hey, listen, Purdue could certainly win the West Division this year. Do not sleep on them. I am a big fan of Jeff Brom. He is just a real Big Ten man. Like they talk about that with Jim Harbaugh at Michigan or whatever. Now, looking over the schedule, I think there's an easy 6 wins here. At Minnesota, at Maryland, and Nebraska in October, lead up to a visit to Madison to take on the Badgers. I'm serious. They could certainly beat any of those teams with this offense. The only real reason I would pick them third is they travel to both Minnesota and Wisconsin, but Purdue avoids Ohio State, Michigan, and Michigan State. This is their year to win the West based on the weakness of the schedule. My best guess, though, is 9-3. Maybe 8-4 for this group. And now your Western Division champions from last year, the Iowa Hawkeyes. Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa, like I say, have very similar dynamic last season. A woefully underwhelming offense and like a transcendent defense. Well, Wisconsin and Minnesota's offense, I think, should be improved. I can't say the same thing for the Hawkeyes. In 2021, Iowa as a team threw 12 touchdown passes and threw 11 interceptions. This was 119th ranked passing offense in the country, and they have the same debate entering this season as last. Is it Spencer Petras or Alex Padilla? I have to say, I really empathize with the Hawkeyes fans because this is a team that is probably most similar to the QB situation that Colorado has. You have 2 very evenly matched candidates at quarterback that are both pretty terrible. And your team did basically nothing in the offseason to address that issue. Padilla is younger, so they say, he has a higher ceiling, but they're both kind of like 150 yards per game, 1 touchdown, 1 interception type guys. The Hawkeyes do return the best tight end in the conference in Sam Laporta. He led the team in receiving at 670 yards last year, but this passing game, I think, is just going to be completely inept. And in 2022, they will be starting 4 sophomores across the offensive line. Damn. Stud running back Tyler Goodson has gone pro. So you have an unproven set of sophomore backs kind of dueling it out for carries in Gavin Williams and LaShawn Williams. I cannot express to you strongly enough how bad this offense is. Number 83 is probably being generous. Now that I have successfully depressed all the Hawkeye fans, let's discuss where they truly succeed. This was a top 20 total defense and a top 15 scoring defense in the nation last year. This defense scored 4 touchdowns in 2021. The defense does return just 67% of that production. The primary loss was on the defensive line, Zach Van Valkenburg, who had 58 tackles, 5.5 sacks last year. He now plays for the Las Vegas Raiders. Of the Hawkeyes' 8 returning starters, Jack Campbell anchors this linebacking group. Campbell is a favorite for the conference Defensive Player of the Year, coming off of a 2021 campaign where he secured 140 tackles, a sack, 2 interceptions, and a forced fumble. This guy was just all over the field. Your 2 other starting linebackers are back as well in Justin Jacobs at Leo and Seth Benson at Will. Those 2 combined for 158 tackles, 2 sacks, 2 interceptions a year ago. How about replacing Van Valkenburg up front? Your 2 starting D tackles are back in Noah Shannon and Logan Lee, who combined on 5 sacks in 2021. At right DN, Joe Evans had 7 sacks in limited minutes last season. And off the bench, Lucas Van Ness had 7 as well. This defensive front is loaded. In the secondary, second-team all-conference defensive back Jack Corner and safety Dane Belton have both gone to the NFL as well. So it'll be first-time starters replacing them in sophomore Cooper Deshawn at defensive back and Quinn Schulte at free safety. Now, this defense was spectacular in 2021, but if they had a vulnerability, it was this group. They gave up 214 yards passing per game. You do return preseason first-team All-Big Ten defensive back Riley Moss, and Jamari Harris and Kayvon Merriweather were starting last season at D-back and safety as well. Those 3 had 9 interceptions combined. I think this is certainly another top 10 defense for the Hawkeyes, but they are a little thin in the secondary. This is really not all that bad of a schedule. Your rival Iowa State is down a bit this year. The only for sure losses, I think, on this slate are Michigan, at Ohio State, and Wisconsin. If the offense can do anything, really, that will determine whether this bunch goes 9-3 or 6-6. Games at Purdue, at Minnesota, and Nebraska at home on the last weekend of the season. Those are going to demonstrate what this team is made of. Now, speaking of Nebraska, here's a stat that will blow your mind. They haven't finished a season with a positive turnover ratio since 2016. Let that settle in. In 2021, the Huskers lost at number 3 Oklahoma, at number 20 Michigan State, to number 9 Michigan at home, at Minnesota, to Purdue at home, at number 15 Wisconsin, and to number 16 Iowa at home. All of those games were by 1 touchdown or less. Man, Husker fans, it was a heartbreak hotel every week last year. In close games, the turnover battle can really swing things. Now, eventually the Huskers have to catch a break, right? Eventually. Well, on this offense, out goes two-time starter Adrian Martinez, and so begins the reign of Casey Thompson at quarterback. Thompson transferred in from Texas, where he threw for 2,113 yards and 24 touchdowns, and ran for another 4 touchdowns last year. This dude is actually pretty dang athletic and elusive. I think it's a very solid pickup for Scott Frost in the portal. But this offensive group does not have a single player on the first, second, or third team all-conference this season. Wide receiver Omar Manning had 380 yards and 2 touchdowns receiving. He is a fourth-team selection alongside sophomore left tackle Teddy Prochazka. Nebraska did pick up former 4-star wide receiver Trey Palmer, who transferred in from LSU. That's going to help bolster a little bit, I think, a depleted skill position core. This offense will be featuring 6 new starters, 4 of which are sophomores. So, same thing here, like with Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. Uncertainty all around the offense, but a very much solid defensive unit. First-team All-Big Ten linebacker Garrett Nelson has been moved to edge. This dude had 57 tackles, 5 sacks, and a forced fumble in 2021. Joining Nelson up front is TCU transfer and second-team All-Big Ten defensive end Ochuan Mathis, who currently sits at second on the depth chart. But, you got to believe he's going to be playing big minutes this season. Behind them at linebacker is an absolute stud in sophomore Nick Heinrich, who led the team in tackles with 99 a year ago. And Luke Remier, the team's second leading tackler at 96. He also had 3 forced fumbles and is back for the 2022 campaign. Defensive back Tommy Hill transfers in from Arizona State to try and help out a very young secondary. Now, Hill is a former 4-star recruit, but all 4 starters in the secondary are going to be sophomores. The youth on this defense is why I don't have this unit as a top 20 in the country. Now, this team did go just 3-9 a year ago, and Scott Frost is on the hottest of hot seats, but it's so crazy to think that had the ball bounced their way a couple of times, this team could have easily been 9-3, not 3-9 last year. Looking at this year's schedule, I think also there's an easy 6 wins here: Northwestern, North Dakota, Georgia Southern, Indiana, at Rutgers, and Illinois. They will probably be in every game this year, though. Remember, they only lost by 7 at Oklahoma last year and only lost by 3 to Michigan. This is not a difficult schedule, so there is wide variance here. The Huskers could finish anywhere from 6-6 to probably potentially even 10-2. It depends on what that offense can do. Now, these last 2 teams my numbers are, like I said, basically interchangeable. They are both definitively better than Indiana, about on par with Rutgers, and considerably less talented than the other 10 teams in this conference. This Wildcat offense scored more than 2 touchdowns just once in their last 8 games, and that one time was just 21 points. The offense returned 65% of the production from a year ago, so there is something to build off of, but your returning quarterback Ryan Helinski threw for less than 1,000 yards last year and just 3 touchdowns. You do have your top 2 rushers from 2021 back in Evan Hull and Andrew Clare, but the projected starter out of fall camp is Cam Porter, the Wildcats' leading rusher from the 2020 season. This is a seasoned O-line, so, like I said, there is something to work with here. On the defensive side of the ball, this group was awful. They gave up more than 30 points in 8 games, including a 30-23 loss at Duke. That is ugly. Now, Fitzgerald brought in 4 transfers to kind of completely revamp the front 7 in Holmes, Barnt, and Johnson on the D-line, and Wendell Davis Jr. from Pittsburgh at linebacker. The only remaining starter on the D-line is a good one, though. In second-team all-conference defensive end Adebawore. The player to watch on this side of the ball, though, is Cameron Mitchell at defensive back. You know, this is just a really new and lacking in talent group. Now, the Wildcats kick things off week 0 against Nebraska in Ireland, and I think that's going to be a complete beatdown. Now, keep in mind, they lost to the Huskers last year 56-7. And they're arguably worse this year than they were last year. You do have Duke and Southern Illinois at home, and the Illini at home at the end of the season. You know, a lot of people might count that Miami, Ohio game as a win, but I think you're going to be better than Northwestern probably this year. So, I mean, this could be a 2-10, probably a maximum of 4-8 this year. And finally, we have the Illinois not fighting so hard Illini. Now, a lot of talking heads think that Brett Bielema has this program headed back in the right direction, and, you know, maybe so. But this season is just a perfect storm of circumstances. The team as a whole returns the 4th least production in the country on both sides of the ball, just 42% on offense. Your new starting quarterback, Tommy DeVito, who transferred in from Syracuse, spent most of the 2020 season battling injuries, and after coming back in 2021, he threw for just 388 yards and 1 touchdown. Now, I mean, Bielema has been talking him up like he's doing great this fall camp, but man, I mean, it seems like he might be permanently broken. At running back, Chase Brown did rush for 1,000 yards last year, but 3 new starters on the O-line, and you're starting a freshman and sophomore at wideout. I think this offense is really going to struggle again. Now, the defense is actually not that bad. They returned their top 2 leading tacklers from 2021 in Tariq Barnes at linebacker and Sidney Brown at defensive back, but you have 5 brand new starters, and 4 of them are sophomores. Both of your defensive ends are sophomore first-time starters. You know, they're going to struggle to get pressure off the edge. Quarterbacks are probably going to be comfortable in the pocket against this Illini defense. Now let's take a look at the schedule. It's really not that tough, but you know, for these guys, I think it probably will be. You have to win your first 2, which won't be easy because you're going to lose to Virginia, probably beat Chattanooga, and then, you know, the Illini will be double-digit dogs in every game until their last game at Northwestern. I think they should get 2 wins, but I'd be shocked if they won more than that this year. So, take a deep breath. We made it through our Big Ten preview. Let's close things out here by looking at a couple of the big early season games. First of all, in that Week 0 matchups, we've got Saturday, August 27th, Nebraska at Northwestern. Remember, that game is being played in Ireland. You know my opinion. I think Nebraska is going to probably blow them out. In a game that will be much more evenly matched, Wyoming at Illinois. Like I said, Illinois needs to win that game. But Wyoming, I think, is probably still kind of a 6. I think I had them at 6-6 in my preview. They're a bowl-eligible caliber team, so that won't be an easy win. Then Thursday, September 1st, Penn State travels to Purdue. Let me tell you right now, I think this will show us if Purdue's ready to make a run at the West Division, if they can knock off Penn State at home. Then Saturday, September 3rd, this is the big marquee matchup. Both top 5 teams in the country. Notre Dame at Ohio State in the Horseshoe. Personally, I think Notre Dame is still very good, but Ohio State's my top talent team in the country. I think Ohio State could win this by 2 touchdowns, really. The next week, Saturday, September 10th, you have Iowa State at Iowa. I think Iowa will probably win that pretty handily. And then week 3, there's really not a ton of big games in the first 2 weeks. Week 3, you start seeing a little more of the showcase. You got Oklahoma at Nebraska in Memorial Stadium, Penn State at Auburn, Michigan State at Washington. I think Washington's going to be much improved this year. And then I've told you several times now, I think this SMU at Maryland game is going to be lights out and fun. So, with all that being said, I know this was long, but I had to get through all the information. I hope we have armed you with some more information to make your bets, to be a fan and watch the games and enjoy college football as we are now less than 2 weeks away. Thank you so much for the support. Thanks so much for checking us out. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share this content with anyone you think might find it interesting, and send me your feedback. As always, at RightOnQCS on Twitter and RightOnQCS@gmail.com is the email. You have been watching Right on Q College Sports. I am your host, Tyson Quiller, and we will get at you next time.
Almost 12 minutes still in the first half. As Slade reverses field. Here's his speed on display. From nowhere gets a block. And turns what might have been a loss of 5 into a gain of 3. And who threw it? His quarterback, Matt White. Cole keeps it. First down. Touchdown, Captain Jack. Gets the edge. Alvin cook off and running again. They will not catch him. Touchdown, number 2 for Cook. Landry Jones back, second possession. Here's DeMarco Murray, cutting, jumping, vaulting, smacked at the 14-yard line. Been deep down the field. Around his half. Robinson can go the distance as well. He bounces off some hits, and they will not catch him. 67 yards and a touchdown. Rolling up his head. He gets stuck. Who else? That's perfect.
Come after me! I'm a man! I'm 40!
Mark Whipple on the sidelines, the offensive coordinator for the Panthers. Pickett, a very good runner. Don't sleep on those legs. Oh, he faked the slide! Sauce time! Pickett! Did that work? Touchdown Pitt!
Altmaier